brought my pencil. Give me something to write on, man.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Meridian Learning and Development Hangout with Fistful of Talent. I'm Allison and I'm with Meridian, and today I'm joined by Chris Dunn, who is the CHRO of Kinetics and the founder of Fistful of Talent. Hey Chris, how are you?
I am great, Allison. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I can't complain.
So two things for you. It's a moving week for me, so I'm moving houses. So forgive the attire in the bare room. There's Emily, by the way. Hi, Emily.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going great. Hey, so the other thing, if people can see it, I'm ready for tonight's NBA Finals. I got the Steph Curry shirt on.
I dig it.
Yeah, so I'm representing. I'm all ready, and looking forward to a great series.
Me too. I like the NBA a lot. A lot of people give it a bad rap.
Don't give it a bad rap. What are we talking about today? We're talking about harassment training.
We're talking about how to make harassment training sexy. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we're going there.
We are.
So my first question for you is, why does harassment training need to revamp?
Well, I think the biggest thing, we've all been there, right? And I want to get your take on this because I'm kind of, historically an HR leader, and you're someone who I know has consumed harassment training, not because you were put in it because there was a problem, but you had to take it via like the new hire process. And it's one of those things where, like so many other things we do in the world of learning and development, there's a ton of potential, but we tend to just go with the standard policy, maybe a few slides, make you read this PDF. It's boring. I think we're going to get into this. You could actually drive a lot of awareness that would take claims down and risks down, and you could do it in a way that would be really engaging with employees, I think, is the thought we had when we wanted to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, I can't even tell you how many harassment trainings I've taken where I think that typically when you bring up harassment training, everyone rolls their eyes and they're like, oh, God, I remember when I had to do that a couple of months ago. It was so boring. Or I had someone made me read this, 60-slide PDF of a presentation from 4 years ago, and then I just had to acknowledge the fact that I had taken it, and you don't take anything away from it. And I think that's kind of a disadvantage to organizations, because there are really a lot of things that you could do with harassment training that are really important, that can make it show that it's like something you value within your organization, rather than just doing it to make sure that you're in compliance.
Well, I agree, and I'll give you one level set here, and then I'll let you take us through what we want to talk about today. But like the level set, I've got a post up, actually sponsored by Meridian on Fistful of Talent. I've got a post up today, and the background is kind of what we're talking about today with harassment training. But the lead-in is the fact that Tinder, the swipe right, like dating app, right, the hookup app, actually came. The CEO came out this week or last week and said that they actually have hired people based off of like connections that didn't result in whatever they wanted to result. They actually make hires out of that.
I saw that, and when I read the headline, I was like, gross.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like creepy, which I think goes to this thought that you can drive awareness in kind of a cool way if you approach it in the right way. And I think stories like the Tinder example, things like that are good ways to go about it.
Yeah, totally. I think another thing that's really great about harassment training that organizations don't really pay attention to is, other than just the participant engagement or the different reasons that it needs a refresher, it shows employees that you really respect them and that you want to create an environment within the workplace that is like healthy and safe. Because I think traditionally you think of harassment training and it's like, it's so like the extreme of one or another, and
right.
You can really shed light on unprofessional behaviors that might be in your workforce that people don't really realize are unprofessional.
Yeah, well, I think the conversation's good because you're approaching it kind of from like an associate/employee perspective. I'm approaching it kind of from a manager of people perspective. And I think the other business reason it makes sense to do a revamp of it is the fact that so many managers of people are probably unaware of a lot of the things that can get them into the danger zone. So I think the more you do interaction with the harassment training you have, the better shape you're in to do what you said, which is show, hey, we care, and we want you to be aware, and we want you to tell us if there's an issue. And then on the manager of people side, they've got to be aware of all the gray area that's out there related to harassment training, because I think if you just do the PDF policy, sign here, you don't get that. So a business reason on my end from a manager of people is you're really going to reduce your risk if you do it. Plus, you're just going to have a healthier workplace.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of managers, what kind of influence do they have making sure that the harassment training is important?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is you should probably mix in managers with new hires and associates. So one of the things you can do, and we'll talk about this I'm sure in the next couple of minutes, but one of the things you can do is rather than just saying, hey, this is a policy, maybe you have that lame video like from the early 90s, which doesn't sound too long ago for me, but it's a long time ago, where people are dressed in a certain style of clothes, stuff like that. You get rid of that and you actually get interactive, making people react and kind of evaluate what type of behavior could be borderline harassment, what could be perceived by harassment by others, even if it's not perceived by you. If you mix manager and associates in together in that type of exercise, you actually build a lot of awareness, and that manager can be exposed to the perceptions of the associates they manage, or the perception of the associates that they would commonly manage, and it's just a healthier way to do it.
Absolutely. I also think it's really important to make sure that managers, when you have to take harassment training, I think a lot of organizations do it once a year, make sure that they take it seriously, because if my manager is like, you have to do this training, it's really stupid, you just need to fill in the blank, I'm not going to take it seriously, and I'm going to take it even less seriously.
Absolutely.
Because they're leading and they're saying it's so dumb, and I'm like, okay, well, this is really stupid, I'm not going to pay attention to it while I'm doing it. So
Absolutely.
That's really important.
Right.
All right. So I guess we've covered the fact that it needs a revamp, but what are some of the ways that you could take the actual courses and the way you're delivering the courses and refresh them? So, videos, interactive exercises, certain things like that. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think, whether you're an instructional designer or whether you're an HR director trying to pull some training together, you've got your base policy. And by the way, for the practitioners out there, we know that harassment training is usually a catch-all thing for all types of harassment. And then they add on sexual harassment as deserving special mention. So really, we're talking about harassment training, really talking about sexual harassment training for purposes of this video. And I think, rather than show people the policy and talk about it a little bit, sign here, the best thing you can do, one way or the other, and it can include video, it can include written exercises where you make people read, answer some things, come back and discuss, or it can also include group exercises where you actually talk about scenarios that may involve a manager of people and the associates they manage, or the associates who are in the general environment, and you talk about a scenario and you basically try and make people give you their take, whether that rises to the level of harassment or not. Because if we've learned anything, we know that harassment is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, because what is offensive to me may not be offensive to you, but the manager of people and all of the teammates of a certain individual have to know where people's thresholds are. So imagine this, whether the exercise is to say, here's the scenario, Allison's a manager of people, she's got an employee, Chris, and you go through and you give them, the 30 shades of gray, not the 50 shades of gray, Allison, you give them the 30 shades of gray related to all the stuff that can happen in the workplace, and then you make them evaluate whether they feel like it rises to the level. And the best way I've seen this done is not necessarily to do it in a written, fill out the answers, we'll briefly discuss it. Best way I've seen it done is through group exercises, and you have 3 or 4 scenarios, and they're gray. And what happens invariably if you have a small group of 3 to 4 people who are evaluating that and they're genuinely interested in it, you'll have different perceptions, different takes. And if you're a manager of people, Allison, and you have 4 people around you in harassment training, 3 of them say, yeah, I don't see a problem, this person's just being overly sensitive. The 4th person says, you know what, there's really no need for that. and I don't think it's right in the workplace. That's the type of dynamic that drives conversation and ultimately drives awareness.
I love the idea of having a dialogue around it, because I think so often you think of just logging in and kind of watching the module and then clicking yes. And I think even some of the online courses I've seen, we just recently did one on ethics training, which I was annoyed to have to do, to be full disclosure, but it was actually really good, and me and my coworkers were talking about how good the course was after it was complete, because it had a lot of those very gray areas.
Right.
And we were able to kind of look at the questions. It didn't feel like here's the scenario and you knew exactly what it was.
Right.
And it was also interesting because if you clicked out of the module, it stopped the module. So if I was like, oh, I'll play this, and then I'm going to work in Photoshop while it's playing. That happened. I had to pay attention, so it was really cool. But I like the idea of adding that dialogue element into it with the group exercise, because it makes it. Those are the people you're working with. So having an understanding of who you're working with and how they feel about those certain issues is probably pretty good.
Right, and the practitioners know, and maybe the training development people probably know this too that are watching this. The practitioners know that there's two primary elements to the sexual harassment component of your harassment training. It's kind of quid pro quo, which is Allison, as a manager of people, says, I'll give you this if you engage in this behavior. You like how I'm turning this around on you, Allison? It's you rather than me. Or me as a manager of people say, hey, I'll give you a promotion, but you got to go out on a date with me, right? That's quid pro quo. That's pretty black and white. Most people get that. Let's face it, if you don't get that as a manager of people, even if you just saw the PDF policy, if you don't get that and we made you sign off, you don't deserve to work here. What catches people is the hostile work environment, which is the second component that most of these trainings go through. That's where the literally 1,000 shades of gray are, and that's really where it comes down to the perception of people. So a couple of examples I gave in the post that you want to kind of bring out in these scenarios for conversations. Couple things. The Tinder thing is first and foremost. Not that you're the Tinder CEO, but let's say you're discussing Tinder, okay? And let's say even if you don't subscribe to Tinder, I don't, by the way, happily married, long time. Hi, Angela. But let's say that you're just discussing what would make you swipe right, based on that interaction. Well, if you do that in a pod environment at work, ultimately, the deeper you go in that conversation, the more you're in the gray area of what somebody might find objectionable. Another example I gave, and this is really ways to bring it to life, because Tinder is something that everybody's kind of aware of. That's fun to discuss the what if, so you can kind of get engagement that way. The other example I gave is Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, HBO series, kind of Dungeons and Dragon-ish, but it's a netherworld. The world doesn't exist, right? But one thing that it involves is it basically involves full frontal nudity, almost every episode or every other episode. So if we're in a pod environment and we're having a conversation about that, the deeper we go in that conversation, the more just bad it can get from a standpoint of somebody raising their hand and saying hostile work environment. So you've got quid pro quo. That's basically covered by the policy. You can give a couple of examples and be done with that. You really have to spend more time on the hostile work environment. I think using things like Tinder or Game of Thrones, rip stuff from the headlines within your scenarios, because that's going to make people want to discuss it even more.
I think that's fantastic, and it's definitely something that a lot of harassment training isn't covering. Is it's almost archaic, what the subject matter is, and not very 2016, and issues that you're actually going to be in the workplace with. So I think that's really great. I did want to stop you for a second. If I know that there's a lot of live viewers right now, so if you have any questions that you want to ask me or Chris, there's a question and answer panel on the right of your screen, and you can type those in. Just want to make sure you could get those covered. All right, so why don't we move on to video. What do you think about video when it comes to harassment training?
Well, I think video is a great setup, and I want to ask you about the ethics training that you went through in just a second. But I think if you're doing harassment training, specifically focused on sexual harassment, I think video is a great setup point, right? So if you've got videos can be just an excellent supplement to the scenario, right? So it's great if you can see some actors actually engaging each other. So it takes a little bit out of the imagination. You get things like facial expressions. You get things like the work environment. Is there anything hanging up in a cube or an office that kind of points somebody to the fact that I'm working for an absolute like bore, like pig? So video is a great setup. And then the video stops, and I think the best way that I've seen it done is you've got effective video that leads to analysis. And I think if you've got the time, and I know we drive a lot of stuff through, KMSs and things like that, but if you've got the time, it's a great time to use video to get into group discussion. But if you can't, video is a great way, especially with technology, to set up a scenario, have somebody answer some questions, and actually do some analysis of the situation. Because even if you're doing it through technology and it's one person, just the fact that you have to watch the video and you can't go into Photoshop, like you mentioned before, you can't go into Photoshop at all, right? You got to watch the video and you got to answer these questions. That's more interactive than most harassment training actually is. Well, tell me about the video and the ethics training. I'm interested in that.
So it wasn't, I don't know if it wasn't a humans acting, but it was sort of like a cartoon, which I think almost is easier because with video you run the risk of having some really terrible, I'm not saying there's terrible actors, but there can be with these sort of scenarios.
Mustache, you got the mustache, which actually might be appropriate for harassment.
Yeah, probably might be. So it was a cartoon video, but it was interesting because it set it up the same way where it was a really short video and then it kind of paused and it presented you with, you went through an avenue of an interactive questionnaire or whatever.
Right.
Which was cool. And I think it was done really, really well because, like I said, it was topical to stuff that's happening now, not just insider trading, obvious answer sort of thing.
Right.
But what's cool about video is have you ever heard of a natural rhythm that filmmakers use?
I have. Tell the audience more.
So everyone kind of is aware that people don't have attention spans that last longer than 20 minutes. But what filmmakers do is about every 8 seconds within the film, they have something that's a stimulus for the brain, whether it's a new angle of the camera shot or someone enters the scene or the music changes. So the purpose of that is to stimulate the brain so that you continue to pay attention. So that's how videos can be really effective in training because you are able to interject those kind of every 8 seconds some sort of stimuli and to keep people paying attention and engaged in it rather than just reading a script and then answering questions or reading a scenario and then having a dialogue.
Allison, is that why you had your black lab walk by at about the 5-minute mark? That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's why my dog came into the shot. Maybe
brilliant.
Nope, she's sleeping.
Got it.
That was totally planned.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think I like that, and I think for all of us, there's different budgets out there, right? So if you're an HR director or you're a learning development professional and you've got this need to build some curriculum around harassment training, specifically sexual harassment training, I think if you can do video, great. If you can shoot it on your own and you're really ambitious, great. If you can buy it from a vendor to set those things up and it includes everything Allison just described, awesome. But if you can't do that, what I would tell you is you've got your policy, and what I would do is I would create 3 to 4 scenarios, and then I would have people either read those scenarios and react to them online, and I would pull things from the headlines, right? I would pull Tinder from the headlines. I would pull Game of Thrones from the headlines, adding any spice I can to spice that up. But I would write those scenarios and deliver them either in a written fashion, or if you're actually training new hires and you're onboarding, spend a little time and break out in groups and have people react to it. Now, that's a professionally facilitated environment, but I think the more you can present scenarios, have people react, and by the way, the more managers of people can actually be exposed to what the broader group of people think, the more they're going to actively think when they're out in the workplace, doing what they do on a daily basis. They'll be more cautious. We're not trying to create robots here. We're just trying to create an environment where people stay between the ditches. Because I can tell you as an HR leader, I've seen good people taken down by harassment claims in the workplace, And I gotta feel not all of those people are bad people. In fact, a lot of them are good people. But if they would have made better decisions, especially related to what creates a hostile environment, if they would have made better decisions, there would have been less risk of that, and they probably would have been able to keep their jobs, where many of those people had to exit the companies that I was serving at the time.
I think that's fantastic. Some really great stuff here. Thank you so much. We're reaching the end of the 20 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Good luck with your move.
Thank you.
Wait, someone actually just said something. You can also use virtual worlds to create your own avatars and videos or snapshots, and own the copyright. And it's also right there. I can't read the rest of it. Anyways, I digress. It's just another piece of advice on that. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Take care.
Bye.